Okay, I've decided that I think that sanity is compromise. If you, an example of this, I can use the Mouse Utopia experiments to illustrate this. What you have is sanity is compromise, yeah, because if you have no compromise, then you have, well, if you have no compromise, then you might have several different things, but basically various forces other than compromise will come into play. And in the mouse experiments, in my opinion, two noticeable behaviors, the most noticeable behaviors, were selfishness and aggression. I think the beautiful people mice were selfish. They just hived off into a corner and took it easy. And I think the aggressive mice were aggressive. And so yeah. So these things may have been useful at one time, as organisms first began to struggle for survival from the primordial ooze. But as life has progressed, they've become a threat to the evolved life. Now, the evolved life has evolved more complex social behaviors, such as compromise. And it prefers its own behavior. I suppose you could call that selfish, really. But its behavior itself is non-selfish, which again leads me to sometimes think that the beautiful people mice were potentially getting things right. But because they were at least non-aggressive. But they could have been called selfish. They didn't, for example, take in the rejects. This was an experiment where mice were provided with everything except unlimited space. There were still problems that arose, and some of the mice were rejected. If the beautiful people mice were really sane and would compromise, they would have palled up with the rejects, because the only thing that would have mattered was sane survival behavior. But they didn't pal up with the rejects, so I think they were selfish. And I think some of the rejects might even have been less aggressive, selfish mice who couldn't get into the beautiful people's places because they weren't selfish enough. And so they didn't get to be in with them. But they could possibly have been non-selfish, and therefore, or less selfish, or not the most selfish, and therefore have been sensed as such, and not had genes that reflected the most selfish, beautiful people's genes, and therefore being rejected. So they were the less selfish ones, even if they were selfish, even if there were any selfish rejects. They were the less selfish ones who therefore didn't end up as the sort of ark, the gene store